Hello, my name's AJ Goldsby. I'm a life master from Pensacola, Florida, and I'm coming to you today to bring you another video. And this video is in my series of the greatest chess games ever played. And this particular game that we're looking at today is one played by Alekhine, and it was played at the Hastings annual Seaside tournament, usually played over the end of the year Christmas holiday. And used to be an annual event, still is. They left off for a little while, but I mean, it's one of the older tournaments. It's very respected. This game was played in 1922, and Yefim Buyabov. A lot of people say Bogoljubov, but I believe you pronounce it Buyabov. Was white, and Alexander Alekhine. I actually believe the correct pronunciation of his name is Alekhine, but no one in America says Alekhine or Alekhine. It's more commonly pronounced Alekhine, although that's incorrect. But anyway, Alexander Alekhine is white, and he's one of the greatest chess players ever. Just one of the greatest attacking players who ever lived. I'm struck lately when I go over the games on the Chess Games website. I've just seen so many pretty little games played by Alekhine lately, miniatures and games where he just dispatched the average master, just made them look silly. And usually it's a miniature; they don't last 25 moves against this guy. So, and Alekhine supposedly is Kasparov said that his play is modeled after this great master. So I want to look at this game, and Alekhine said that he felt like this was his best ever game that he had ever played, or one of his very best. And certainly this game and the one that he won against Rady, both of those games I have annotated. And if you'll search the internet, just name the players and also include my last name, Goldsby, I'm sure you'll find that with any search engine. But anyway, let's just go ahead and look at this game. And this is just a very, very beautiful game. In fact, what I'm going to do here is we're going to go ahead and flip the board because I want to look at this from black's side of the board because black winds up winning this game. Game starts off as a Dutch, d4, f5. For a long time, the Dutch defense was considered unusable, not good, weakened the king side, etc., etc., etc. Players like Rubinstein and Alekhine made the Dutch look bad, and because of those flaws, for a long time the Dutch just wasn't used at the top level. And then back in the late 70s and early 80s, by the mid 80s, there were a lot of what they called the Young Turks, guys like Yusupov and not Boleslavsky, but Sakis, and those guys they began playing the the Dutch defense again at the highest level, and so we saw a renaissance in the Dutch. And today the Dutch is not played a lot at the top level, but it's still played much more frequently than it used to be. When I was coming up in chess, the Dutch sat pretty much idle. It wasn't used by hardly any grandmasters circa, say, the 1970s. No top grandmaster certainly played it back in those days. It was saved for an outing against a quote unquote lesser player. But anyway, today, the Dutch defense is being used quite a bit, and the theory, thanks to the chess engines, is being enlarged literally on a daily basis. But anyway, so white plays c4. That's just a normal move there. Knight f6, g3. And basically, this is considered the correct way to play against the Dutch. One of the attacking ideas in the Dutch is often black plays something called the stone wall. He'll put his pawns on f5, e6, d5, and c6, put his bishop on d6. He'll castle kingside, and the queen will go e8 to h5. And in that attacking scheme, and also later knight g4, black has tremendous pressure against white's h2 square. Well, Rubinstein was a very brilliant player, and he was the first to work out and really systemize this line of playing against the Dutch, and is rightfully named the Rubinstein system. But anyway, he was the one who mapped out this idea of the fianchetto, and it's good for white for a number of reasons. This d5 square is a very sensitive square for black, so it's very good to have your light squared bishop pointed against it, and also having all these pieces in the way makes it much more difficult to attack the king side. Black plays e6, white plays bishop g2. Now black's next move is bishop b4 check. That's okay. I mean, it's not totally unplayable. Certainly at the amateur level, it would be all right. But today, theory says, that's not good. And basically black's game becomes a little sterile. Bishop d2, bishop takes d2, knight takes d2. And, you know, that might have been the first inaccuracy, really, by white. If white would have played, say, queen takes d2 and knight c3, I think he just has the better game. It doesn't matter if this knight comes to e4 and smacks the queen. The queen simply just, it can go back. But by putting that knight on d2, white just slowly starts to drift into a bad position. He doesn't play the most accurate move every single time, and it's amazing how well Alekhine is able to take advantage of that. Knight c6, knight gf3, black castles, white castles. Now, in this position, I just want to talk about this position just briefly. According to standard theory today, black does not have a good game because his one bishop is slightly bad, and he's traded off his quote-unquote good bishop for white's possibly bad bishop, because a lot of times in these lines, white winds up having a lot of pawns on dark squares. So black's not supposed to have a good game, but I don't think any of these rules really apply to Alekhine. And he understands chess very well. He knew how to manipulate the squares on the board. And you'll watch his very next move, d6, controls the dark squares, and he's going for e5. So Alekhine begins moving all of his pawns off the light squares in order to get some more dark square control, and also to free his light squared bishop. Queen b3, that's a very useful pin. Now, if the bishop moves, the white queen can come down here and grab this pawn. Plus, there's a nasty little pin here on the b3 to, the a2 rather, to g8 diagonal. So anyway, black's king, he just hides his king in the corner, which is probably a common sense kind of move. Queen c3, again, white seems to be doing well here, but all of a sudden, e5. And suddenly, at first it looks like a blunder. You say, oh, wow, black just dropped a pawn. But if you look at it a little bit better, if pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, queen takes knight, all of a sudden, queen takes d2. These pawns are gone in the center. And all of a sudden, white finds himself a piece down. Basically, Alekhine always found those kind of surprise moves that his opponent thought maybe he was preventing something, but Alekhine was never one to miss a tactic. White plays e3. That's kind of common sense, but I'm not sure, what he could have done differently, but he slowly is losing the game. a5, a very nice move by black. Black's basically guarding this b4 square and preventing white from gaining too much space on the queen side. That looks like insignificant, given that black's plan in the Dutch is normally to attack the king side. But also, Alekhine was a great enough player to know that he would never just totally give away one side of the board if he could avoid it. b3, queen e8, a3, queen h5. And there's that king side attack that I was talking about. Notice the queen it's hitting this square, it's hitting h2. You've got a lot of pressure here, and these are the kind of ideas that are typical for the Dutch defense. When I was coming up in chess, the best player by far on the Gulf Coast was a friend of mine. His name was Scott Pfeiffer. And J. Scott Pfeiffer was easily the strongest player, I think, on the Gulf Coast back then. And he played the Dutch quite a bit. And I used to just watch in utter amazement as he would, reel out the Dutch. And, he would just blow strong players away. He'd be on first board, and he had the black pieces, and, he'd play the Dutch, and he'd just get this amazing attack, and he would handle it very skillfully. And, it seems like his opponent was always the first one to crumple. And he always managed to find a way to do some damage to his opponents. So I was always kind of mystified by that. But Scott, back in those days, when I first started out, I was just a Class D player, and Scott was already a very good player and later became literally the best player on the Gulf Coast. Of course, this was back probably circa in the early to mid 70s. But anyway, this is the king side attack. Black's got pressure on the king side. He can do things like g4, g5, maybe rook g8, and then play, rook g6, rook h3. And then if black isn't careful, his h2 pawn is falling. So there's all kinds of ideas here for black. White plays h4. Now that was actually not a good move there. The correct move, according to the engines and all the annotators, was d takes e5, d takes e5, and now knight d4. And basically, white should be okay there. And he can defend by bringing his rook over. He can play h3 and maybe bring his rook over, etc. But I mean, he can get out of this, so that would have been a better defense. This move h4 is kind of lackadaisical. Um, Apparently, Bogoljubov didn't think the weakening of his king side was really going to amount to anything. But watch how Alekhine sets about forcing more weaknesses on the king side. He basically makes White's king side look like a sieve, and then he'll transfer his attentions elsewhere. But it's just amazing how he plays and handles this game. Knight g4, knight g5, bishop d7. Black's still developing his pieces, and also there was a threat that White might capture here and maybe double Black's pawn. So this is a developing move. It connects the black rooks, and plus now the knight on c6 is guarded. So if bishop takes knight, just bishop takes bishop, and black will be fine. f3, white is obviously uncomfortable. I mean, he's uncomfortable with that knight sitting on g4, but in my opinion, he should have never pushed that pawn. Excuse me. He should have just let that pawn alone, because this is going to be a very serious weakening now of the king side. Plus your fianchetto bishop, your best piece maybe in the whole board, is now going to be blocked in by a pawn. Knight goes back to f6, f4. Now White's freeing himself, or so he thinks. Naturally, Alekhine's neither going to exchange or something like that. He just plays e4, and now White's king side is completely bottled up, and it makes a very strange impression with a pawn on f4, pawn on g3, and a pawn on h4. It makes it hard for Alekhine to attack on this side of the board. I think that's what Bogoljubov was thinking. He was thinking that, if he could nullify Alekhine on the king side, Bogoljubov himself, White, could turn all of his attention to the queen side, and because all of his pieces are over there, transfer his pieces over there and win. I think that's what he was thinking, but it does not work out that way. RFD1, h6, knight h3, d5. Again, this is about gaining space, and Alekhine is just slowly moving forward. Knight f1, knight e7, a4, knight c6. Now he's going back after the d4 square. Once White played a4, now Black sees that basically the b4 square belongs to him. Only, White can't control that with a pawn anymore. He needs his pieces to control that square now. Rook d2, knight b4, bishop h1. I don't understand that move at all. I think White would have been better off to start maybe transferring all of his pieces to the queen side. He certainly has botched things. He doesn't have a chance now. Black's got the queen side plugged up, and he doesn't have a chance on the king side, obviously. So really things are going very well for Black, but it's not at all clear how Black's going to win or break through here. But I think the handling, probably part of the genius of this game, was how well Alekhine played the early part of it. And Bogoljubov was a very strong player. In fact, at one time, he was winning just tournament after tournament. And according to Jeff Sonas, he was clearly the number 2 player in the world at one time. In fact, he might have even spent a little bit of time as the #1 player. So, Bogoljubov was no fish. I mean, he had that kind of a gregarious nature, and he seemed to enjoy tournaments much more so than matches. But yeah, if he had a weakness, it was probably that he probably didn't have the mentality to sit there and grind against the same opponent day after day. And of course, Alekhine was willing to do whatever it took to win at chess. And I think part of the genius of Alekhine is how well he handled the early part of this game, and basically made a very strong player just look ridiculous. I mean, I'm not trying to make fun of Bogoljubov, but White's handling of this position, I mean, it's just incredible. How bad White's position now looks, and how bad it'll look later on. So we'll get to that. But anyway, now Black plays Queen e8. That's a truly great move. Maybe give that a double exclam. Black abandons his seemingly promising game on one side of the board to go for an unknown type of game on the queen side. And back in the day when Alekhine first did this idea of switching fronts and constantly being on the lookout and changing fronts, these kind of techniques, masters absorb these things today and do these things rather routinely today. And it's not really thought that much of. However, back in Alekhine's day, this kind of massive switching of fronts, was just not a real well-known idea. The motif had not been seen a lot before, and certainly, in my opinion, it's never been done any better than it's done in this game. I mean, Black just he totally dominated the king side, got White to make major concessions there, and now he's going to switch all of his attention to the queen side and try to break through. Rook G2, D takes C4, B B takes C4, Bishop takes A4. Okay, Black's just won a pawn. You know, Alekhine's looking very good here. I'm not sure what Bogoljubov is thinking, but things are not going well for White. Knight F2, Bishop D7, Knight D2, B5. Black continues to go forward, and apparently he doesn't even care if White plays something like pawn takes pawn, Bishop takes pawn, Queen takes pawn. You know, he just continues to charge in over here on this side of the board, and it. I think White should have done that. He maybe should have opened some lines here. I'm not sure how exactly how Alekhine was planning to answer that, but White continues his somewhat passive nature here, and that's the other thing I think that killed this game is White thought that he could hold with passive moves, and today we know for a certainty. I mean, you know, masters teach this, and the Russian school teaches the value of an initiative. That once you get the ability to dictate events in the game and control the course of the game, once you grab the reins, you never let them go. And these ideas, again, are very common today. But of course, back in Alekhine's day in 1922, you know, these things were not that well defined. In fact, Nimzovich had yet to clearly define. He'd already begun working on his ideas and even publishing some of them. But the whole world had yet to absorb Nimzovich in 1922. Knight D1, Knight D3. There's a monster outpost for Black. Rook takes A5. And now, you know, that again, notice that, you know, Black, rather than trenchantly hanging on to his material and perhaps allowing White an ironclad blockade, you know, he just gave back the pawn just to create more chances for himself and basically, you know, make him look silly. B4, Rook takes A8. And here you think, well, he's got to play Rook takes A8, Queen takes A8 rather, and then, you know, White will move his queen away. He'll transfer his rook over. He'll play Bishop F1, G2, F1. You know, he'll slowly bring his piece over the queen side. The material's equal and everything's hunky dory here. Well, that's hardly the case because, you know, of what Alekhine's next move. Real bold imagination. I mean, what he does now is just phenomenal. The level and the depth of this combination is just astounding. And he plays a really beautiful move now. B takes C3. Double exclam. Absolutely one of the prettier moves ever made on the chessboard. You know, Rook takes E8. And now, you know, you think, well, if Rook takes Rook, you know, and then, you know, White's going to be a piece down. I mean, Black rather is going to piece down. And, you know, how does you know, Black respond to this? I mean, he's got a rook hanging, you know, he's down material. I mean, what is he going to do? Well, Alekhine already had the answer for that too. C2, double exclam. And here's an idea that problemists today have exploited a lot, and you'll see in a lot of really interesting chess problems. But it's the idea of a knight on the first row being attacked by a pawn. Basically, you know, the knight can't defend, the square and also stop the knight, the pawn from queening, promoting at the same time. Rook takes F8 check, King H7, Knight F2, C1 queen. So Black gets a second queen here in this game. But White has a lot of material yet, so it's not clear, you know, is he clearly lost? But anyway, Knight F1, Knight E1. Now another good move. Black threatens, you know, Knight F3, just smothered mate, you know, so White's going to have to respond to that. Rook H2, Queen takes C4. Notice Black's picking off more material, you know, while White's king is tied up and while his pieces are tied up, you know, Black just picks off a little thing here and a little bit there. Rook B8, Bishop B5. Now there's the threat of Queen takes F1 check, and Bishop G2 won't quite do because of Knight takes, and if King takes, Queen takes Knight check is still an easy win for Black. Rook takes B5. That was pretty much forced. Queen takes B5, G4, Knight F3 check. Once more, we see the idea of Alekhine, you know, he could have taken on G4, but he's got a very specific plan in mind here. Bishop takes F3, E takes F3, G takes F5, Queen E2. Black is tying, has white tied completely up. White is just totally reduced to a position basically where it's pretty soon it's going to be zugzwang. In other words, every piece move that that white makes, then it's gonna cost the material. And it's just amazing how well Alekhine played this game, because Bogoljubov is actually against the average master. I think Bogoljubov would have probably drawn without any problems, just based on the fact that white has enough material for the queen, a knight, and a rook, and also he's eliminated a lot of the pawns. Pretty soon, if the c pawn disappeared, all the pawns are going to be on this side of the board, and white's going to have a huge pawn advantage in pawns. So I think it would be very difficult without accurate play for black to win this position. But Alekhine was very precise when he needed to be. D5, King G8, H5, King H7. That's just about making white use up some of his pawn pushes. Okay. E4, knight takes E4, knight takes E4, queen takes E4, D6, C takes D6, F6. White's playing giveaway, but he's pretty much forced to. He doesn't have a choice. Now rook D2, and all of a sudden we see Alekhine do it, and repeating the same theme that we saw earlier. Yeah, and if you were wondering about these pawn sacks, maybe I should explain this just a little bit better. Basically, it looks like white is playing giveaway, but he has a problem there, is that, he can't really, move anything. In other words, this knight ever moves, this pawn falls. This knight doesn't have a lot of good squares, and maybe if he moves this knight, we run into problems with, queen E1 check. This rook doesn't have a whole lot of moves. If it moves off the G file, then black just simply snacks on this pawn and snacks on this pawn with his knight. So it looks like white's playing giveaway here, but it's because he was pretty much forced to do that. Knight takes e4, queen takes e4. White's just lacking moves here. The condition is called, in chess, is called Zugzwang. A lot of people say Zugzwang, but that's actually incorrect. The word is German in origination, and the correct pronunciation of the word is Zugzwang, which literally means move compulsion. And we define Zugzwang in chess as a condition whereby there are no free moves in chess. There's no pass or anything like that. So basically, you have to make a move every single time in chess. And basically what's happening now to white is basically that he's forced to move. He doesn't want to move, but he's forced to move, because sooner or later he's got to make a move, and there's not a whole lot that white can do. For example, if white wanted to say play rook b2, try to get his rook to the 7th or 8th rank, black simply plays queen d4 check, forking b2 and g1. So white's playing giveaway here, but it's because he doesn't have anything better. d6, c takes d6, f6, g takes f6, rook d2, queen e2. Now we see another sacrifice. I've lost track of the number of queen sacrifices in this game, and now white has no choice but he feels like he has no choice but to accept. If the rook moves away, queen g2 is mate. If it moves off the second row, and if the knight moves, then he drops his rook. So really, there are not a lot of choices here, and it's just one of those kind of positions, like rook takes d6, queen g2 mate. There's just not very many good moves here for white, so he sees no choice but to grab the knight. Pawn takes, king f2. That was forced there. The white king has got to come up. If he plays anything else, then black's either going to queen here or he's going to take here. In other words, king there just takes and queens. But I mean, the point is the king's got to come up to try to stop that pawn from queening, which means black is regaining his material. King f2, e takes f1 check, king takes. And now it's just a one king and pawn ending. King g7, king e2, king f7, king f7, king f7, king e3, king e6, king e4, and now d5 check here. And maybe, white resigns here, and I make the comment here, maybe he didn't want to see a fourth queen. Alekhine get his fourth queen in this game. And this is just a magnificent game, in my opinion, where black played with unparalleled brilliance on both sides of the chessboard. Irving Chernev is one of my absolute favorite authors, and he considered this the greatest game of chess ever played, easily the most brilliant. Alekhine thought it was one of the 2 or 3 best games he ever played in his entire career. And I think it's very great. I rank it as the 4th overall best game ever played. It's ranked very highly in a lot of books dedicated to brilliancy in chess. And I have a web page on this. Just going to briefly show you my web page on this game. There you can see the address at the top. It's www.ajschess.com/lifemasteraj /bogo-alek1.html. That's my web page. And you find that by going, the way you find my web page is very simple. You go to AJ's Chess, you click on the new home of my GeoCities. GeoCities is now closed, but you click there. This is my GeoCities site, which has now been moved to this site here, www.ajschess.com/lifemasteraj. You just come down here to this box, which is a permanent fixture here on my site. And in 2003, I literally worked probably about eight and a half years to annotate all the 10 best games. But anyway, just click on that link there. That brings you to my top 10 list. And just scroll down there. Number 1 is Kasparov. Number 2 is Botvinnik. Number 3 is Lilienthal versus Rogozin. I've already done my video for that game. And then number 4 is, of course, the game we're looking at today, Bogoljubov versus Alekhine, or Alekhine more correctly. But anyway, that concludes my video. If you've enjoyed my video and would like to make a contribution to my webpage and my web pages and my video efforts, then just go to PayPal, www.paypal.com, and make a contribution by using my email, which is lifemasteraj@yahoo.com. All one word, just run it together. Just lifemasteraj with no periods, no spaces, @yahoo.com. And if you enjoyed the videos and the chess game, the web page is very detailed. It's, I believe, the most detailed web page anywhere to be found on this particular game. There's more analysis, and I also analyze what all the other masters who looked at what, and even found a few improvements with the chess engines. And this page has been around for a while. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that it's, I believe first put it up in probably like 1995. That was when I first finished annotating that game. I may have not gotten my web page done around that time, but I did this game first for a Southern chess magazine many years ago, and eventually I transcribed that work to the computer, and it became part of my internet efforts. But anyway, that's my web page on this game. Thank you for watching my video, and I hope you'll email me and tell me if you enjoyed my videos, maybe suggest which game you would like to see next, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.